Good evening, everyone. I hope you are well and keeping safe in the current climate. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sam Bradley and I'm the KE Relationship Manager for the Northern Region in the AHDB Pork team. I will be facilitating this evening's meeting. So tonight we're going to be looking into grower and finisher management with Christina Diamond. Just a few points of housekeeping before we start. All participants will be on mute, and so no one is actually able to communicate verbally throughout this webinar, except for us as the organisers and Christina obviously presenting today's session. Today's session will run for approximately an hour and a half, so starting in a minute and finishing roughly about 8:15, and we'll then have 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Just as a heads up, when the presentation comes to an end and the webinar's finished, once we've sort of gone through the questions and I've given some next steps, I just wanted to warn you that when we close the webinar, the screen that you see will close quite abruptly. So that is the end of the webinar. Nothing's gone wrong. It's just it is a little bit abrupt. We'll also be recording tonight's session, and anyone who's registered will receive a link in the next sort of 24 to 48 hours once we've finished. It'll also then be available on various online platforms such as our website, the YouTube channel, and the BPA website. So don't worry about taking too many notes. It will be available for you afterwards. And for anyone signed up with PigPro, our online training record, you're able to log your attendance for this webinar there too. As I said, we'll be collecting questions throughout the talk and asking them in the allocated 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session. Any problems today with audio or visual, then just flag that to us through the question box. So this slide shows you how to ask a question on a laptop. So you should have in your navigation pane an orange arrow. So if you just click on that box, it will then bring up a couple of lists, a couple of grey tabs, so audio and questions. If you click on questions, start typing in the box and press send, we'll be able to see those. No other attendees will be able to see your questions. It will just be us as the organisers, and we'll then cover those, or a number of those, at the end. Any questions that come in that we don't have time to cover, we'll be endeavouring to get some responses from Christina and sending those out following the webinar. So just to let you know who is organising and running the webinar tonight. As I said, we've got Christina from Farm Vet Integrated Livestock Services. She'll be presenting and running through her slides. As I said, I'm Sam Bradley, KE Relationship Manager in the North, and we've also got Emily Boyce, who works alongside me in the Northern region. She's the KE Manager in the background, helping us to run today's webinar. Brilliant. So that's it from me. I'll hand you over to Christina to introduce herself and kick off tonight.
Hi everyone, I hope you can all hear me. If not, now's the time to flag that to Sam and the guys at AHDB. If not, welcome to tonight's webinar. We're going to chat about principles of grower and finisher management. Like I said, my name is Christina Diamond from Farm Vet. One of the vets there. I've been a vet at Farm Vet for a year now, and overall been a vet for just over 3 years, mainly dealing with pigs. So hope I can answer any questions at the end and you enjoy today's webinar. So what we're going to go through today, so it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of grower and finisher because we don't have very long. So I'm going to cover the broad basics of everything and try and get it suit everyone's needs logging in today. And like I said, ask any questions if you need to at the end. So housing, we're going to try and cover different types, ventilation, temperature requirements. We're going to cover health a little bit, which we haven't done previously as much, so I want to cover a little bit more again today, and cover things like feeding and water management. So just starting with housing. So what basically we need to ask ourselves the question of, what do we want from our pig accommodation? And I've just come up with a list, and it's not an extensive list, so there'll be more to add, but as a very basic level, I would want protection from the weather for the pigs, so that we prevent any chilling, and we prevent them being over hot in the summer as well, and we prevent any particular drafts on the pigs, and just so that they are in good thermal comfort at all times. We also want to minimise access to the sheds or to the pens from wildlife. That's both from vermin and from larger wildlife, and that's just to protect the health of our pigs overall generally, and also to protect the infrastructure of our sheds. We want all the sheds to be safe for the pigs, so not made from any toxic material, but not have any or have any poor electrics within it, which can obviously be a health and safety concern in terms of fire, but also not have any sharp edges and things that could harm the pigs in any way as well. So well maintained and safe for the pigs is important. We want the pig accommodation to allow us to have good observation of the pigs, so allow us to look over the pens fairly easily and see all the pigs very quickly. We find often in sheds where we struggle to see the pigs at the back, which require going into more often, generally, and not as ideally. The pigs are generally not as ideally looked after. We want to make sure that we have as easy stockmanship as possible, so that the pigs are always got up, gone through, and that's easy for you, so you can get through gates without having to scale big walls. And so that none of our staff or we are not tempted to cut corners and not go in with the pigs. So we want to be in with the pigs as much as we can. Then we need to consider whether we would want slatted or straw accommodation, which are the main types of accommodation. You may also see outdoor accommodation with little pig tents as well, but hopefully there will be some straw involved there. So I'm just going to go through the basics of pros and cons of each. Again, not extensive lists. You might have more that you can think of, but I just thought I'd just mention a few pros and cons from our end. So slatted accommodation. The pros are generally that we see most often the pigs are kept in smaller groups, so smaller pen sizes, less pigs in a pen, and as a result we have, well, they move around, they run around less, and sometimes that can lead to slightly less lameness, but also there's also less competition at the feeders if we have slightly smaller groups, and it's easier to size then into these pens when we have more pens, so that we can group by size more easily. There's generally slightly less labour involved. We don't have to muck them out as regularly, so that makes life a little bit easier in terms of stockmanship. Often on slatted accommodation, we can manage the temperature and the ventilation more easily, so have systems in place so that we can have automatic ventilation and make sure our temperature's set on a curve, so that we don't have to so the pigs are in thermal comfort all the time without too much effort from our end. Often these pens, because they are smaller, again, as we said, allow better individual pig inspection without having to walk through the pen as often, and often also because they're smaller, easier treatment of individual pigs. Some of the cons include they're quite expensive to put up initially, so there's quite an expensive initial setup cost. Quite a lot of different environmental enrichment is required additionally compared to straw sheds. The areas around the feeders often get worn, and slat maintenance is often a problem generally. So the feed can eat through the slats quite quickly, particularly if it's wet fed systems. So slat maintenance is really important, be it that in the mostly in the concrete slats that we see, but still might have some of our smaller growers on plastic. So generally these need to be replaced and maintained regularly. We might see some more skin abrasions and possibly more lameness in actually slatted sheds because of the way that they're lying and running. And if we're not careful of our slat width, we can see more foot injuries from getting caught between the slats, although we should be having a correct slat width to avoid that. We often also, well, generally it's also said that we may see some more vice on slatted accommodation, again, because we don't have that natural nesting material, that natural enrichment already built into the shed. So we must always put in extra enrichment for that particular shed. So moving on to some, the straw shed. Some of the pros would be initial setup costs are generally cheaper, particularly if you're putting them into former cattle sheds or potentially former grain stores which have been converted, or even putting up a basic Yorkshire boarded shed would be cheaper than putting up a slatted shed generally. Perceived better welfare, definitely perceived better welfare because of the straw, which is deemed by DEFRA as optimal enrichment material. And we do often see them playing and nesting within the straw. So as long as it's nice and clean bedding, then it is good enrichment, and we may see less vice as a result. Because their pens are often larger, we often find that they are able to escape from bullies and have, so the smaller pigs are able, or even some of the larger pigs are able to escape from the bullies and have their own little sections without having too much vice. Some of the cons, however, is generally it's a higher cost of production, particularly on years like this where the straw cost is high as well. And they're expending quite a lot of energy in these sheds as they're not temperature and ventilation automatically managed. So the pigs are generally using energy to keep warm, so not using our feed as much as in the right way as we would want. There is a slightly higher risk of mycotoxins using straw. This is particularly if you're using poor quality straw or straw which has got damp and, or warm, or straw which has excessive soil in it. This is all poorer quality straw related generally. We can see more riding problems in straw sheds, or generally we do see more riding problems in straw sheds when we're mixing the groups and have the larger groups. Often vermin control, including birds and rodents, is quite difficult in straw sheds, and we often need to be more vigilant of that. They're also, because we have to muck them out and clean them, they're often difficult to disinfect as well as slatted sheds, which are often plastic and easier to fully disinfect. It's harder to treat individual pigs generally because of the large groups, so harder to isolate individual pigs that need treatment, or generally go through the pigs and identify the pigs that need treatment is slightly more difficult. Yeah, and those are the main ones that we've sort of come up with. There are more, as we said, and we'll have another chat about some more of the housing stuff now. So that brings us on to ventilation, which is really important to think about in our buildings. So why do we need to ventilate pig buildings? Why can't we just close them in? Obviously, it's really important to bring in fresh, cool, moist and fully oxygenated air for the pigs to get the best out of them. We want to remove the warm, dry, stale air and prevent things like pneumonia as a result. And we also want to remove any harmful gases, for example, ammonia, which can build up in straw and slatted sheds if we're not careful. We also want to remove, as much as we can, that dusty air, which can again irritate the respiratory airways of pigs, and also reduce the bacterial and viral load by pushing out older air. Ventilation can also help to control housing temperature slightly, particularly in straw sheds. So when we're controlling ventilation to a good degree by managing our Yorkshire boarding and putting some gale breakers down, etc., we can actually increase the temperature of our sheds in that way. So ventilation does go hand in hand with controlling temperature, and generally we want the best conditions possible for our pigs and our staff. So here are just some basic principles of building ventilation. As we know, outside temperature fluctuates by season, and it also fluctuates whether it's day versus night. In principle, hot air rises and cold air falls, and air passing through narrow openings moves more quickly and further than those that pass through wider openings. Outlets tend not to affect airflow, but inlets pointed in certain directions do affect actual airflow. So basically, the thinner our inlets, the further and the faster our air moves. So just some diagrams of some different sheds just to illustrate the principles of ventilation in different types of shed. So this is in a naturally ventilated building, which can be automatically controlled via the inlets, but doesn't necessarily have to be, can be manually controlled. Ooh. So generally with ventilating any sheds, particularly those that are naturally ventilated, we rely on the stack effect, which is just the effect of hot air rising and our inlets at the sides resulting in cooler air being not dropped but slowly lowered towards the pig and circulating air, as you can see from the picture. With this principle, we need to make sure that our sheds are far enough apart so that we are not drawing air in from another shed through our inlets. So we say at least 6 meters, but that does vary depending on the type of ventilation in the sheds. And as we said, ideally inlets would be automatically controlled, and that way, based on the temperature of the shed and the number of pigs and the gases in the shed, you can then adjust the inlets so that the optimal airflow is passing. Pigs, as we said, naturally prefer to dung in the cooler areas of the shed, so you'll be able to see how your ventilation is working by their dunging pattern. So the next types of shed would be a fan low pressure house. You can get higher pressurized houses where you have inlet fans as well as extraction fans. But this particular example is of a low pressure where we have an extraction fan but an automated inlets but not fan inlets. So in this example, you see that the cold air actually goes along the pitch of the roof before dropping down, and the warm air also circulates before being extracted at the end. Ideally, again, inlet gap control is automatically controlled so that we have a constant air speed and constant air movement without cooling the pigs. And air is drawn then automatically through the extraction fan at the top. By law, all automatic ventilation systems must have an alarm or a fail-safe device to protect the pigs from overheating. Using this type of system, all of the rooms and all of the pens have to be airtight from one another. So all of the sheds, either if you're having a whole shed ventilated in that way, or the rooms in that shed need to be air sealed from one another. So we've talked about how important ventilation is, then we need to make sure that we're maintaining our ventilation equipment. So good ventilation would be well maintained, hygienic, functioning correctly. Whether it's manually controlled or automatically controlled, we need to make sure that the function is as we expect it to be. Bad ventilation would be very dirty, poorly maintained. For example, as you can see, our little inlets, inlet flaps are on the bottom left there. We've got some missing, and on the bottom right, we've got a very dirty fan, which will be drawing air in, which will be drawing dusty air in as well, which is not ideal. So we want to make sure these are clean and well maintained at all times to make sure our sheds are functioning the way we want to. If we have, sorry, just another point to that slide, if we have naturally ventilated sheds, we want to be making sure that our Yorkshire boarding is well maintained as well, and that if we have gale breaks, etc., that we need to use in the winter, that they are also well maintained and not got large holes in them, and that we are making sure that we are manually adjusting them for the for the weather and on the given day or on the given night or night. Thank you. Next slide. Sorry, Sam. So how can you tell if ventilation is correct? So basically, we need to look at the pigs to tell if our ventilation is correct, as it goes hand in hand with often how the pigs are feeling. So the lying behaviour of the stock will tell you particularly if there's drafts or if they're cold. So if they're cold, they'll start to huddle. If there's drafts, you'll find that the pigs start dunging in one area of the pen where that direct cold air is dropping, which is unusual. And also you'll find them all huddling in one other area of the pen, which is the warm section, and where there are no drafts. The actual temperature within the shed when you walk in will tell you whether the ventilation is working correctly, if it's very and the air quality as well. So if it's very stuffy and it feels very oppressive when you walk in, the likelihood is that you've got a very low air speed moving through, and that needs to be adjusted, particularly if it's automatically controlled. Or even as well if it's manually controlled. If you're walking into a naturally ventilated shed, again, if you're very, very cold in the shed, then you'll be able to tell whether we need to adjust our gale brakes or some cladding over our Yorkshire boarding. And generally just seeing the presence of drafts when you're walking through, underneath gates, above gates, in a naturally ventilated shed, and in a automatically controlled around the inlets or the outlets. So here's just an example of our pigs who are in a slatted or automatically controlled shed. So the ventilation is all automatically controlled as to the temperature, but the pigs are exceedingly cold. So they are actually getting drafts from below them, from below the slats, as well as a downdraft over the front of the pen. Unfortunately, that draft also is right by that feeder, so it's discouraging feed intake as a result, and we can see our pigs cold and huddling at the back of the pen. So if you're unsure of how your shed is performing, or what your ventilation is actually doing, or how the air is circulating within your shed, and whether the ventilation is working as you think that it is, a good thing to do is set up some smoke bombs or use a smoke device, and that will show you so you can visualize how the air is circulating. And if there's very little air circulation, air speed, you'll just find that the smoke stays in one place and drops. Or if there's the circulation as we expect there to be in the circle shapes, you should be able to see the swirling within that smoke as we would expect. It will also show you any drafts, if present, as the smoke will be blown out of that area. So what's going wrong if the shed is either too warm or too cold? So if the shed is too warm or too cold, our ventilation may not be working as we expect it. So if it's too stuffy, we may not be having enough ventilation, so enough air circulation. If it's too cold, we may be having a too higher air speed through the shed, whether it's naturally or automatically controlled. So that needs adjusting however we can. The heating system may not be working if it's in an automatic temperature controlled shed, so that needs adjusting, or our temperature sensors need having a look at, whether they're covered in flies or muck, so that they're reading the wrong temperature and the actual room is a different temperature entirely, and checking that those temperature sensors are working correctly is really important. There may be insufficient insulation in either naturally ventilated sheds or fan-assisted sheds. Wrong placement of the temperature sensor is also possible. So placing temperature sensors, for example, just by an inlet would read incorrectly, or right by a draft, or very high up rather than at roughly pen level, may give you the wrong temperature reading. We need to check that our fans are working correctly, as our fans may be incorrectly working and as a result affecting the temperature. The air inlet size may be too small or in fact too large. Generally incorrect air movement, so our stack effect is not working as we think it is. And in automatically controlled sheds, our climate curve, either our temperature or ventilation curves, are set incorrectly or on the wrong day, or wrongly installed generally. So we went through this a little bit in the weaner talk, but I'm just going to have a quick revision of this concept of the thermoneutral zone. So the thermal neutral zone is the area between the upper critical temperature and the lower critical temperature of the pig. So basically, it is the temperature range in which the pig is comfortable. So that means lying on its side very comfortably, no need to huddle, but also dunging normally in the cooler area of the pens and not expending energy and heat. So as the pigs get heavier, generally that thermoneutral zone widens. So the range of temperatures at which the pig is comfortable widens, which is good news. But we still need to make sure we are in that zone at all times to ensure that we have good feed conversion, continued good intakes, and generally happy and healthy pigs. So again, we ran through something similar in the weaner chat. Just want to stress that these are examples only, and the temperatures will vary with different types of housing and the presence of straw or not, and whether you're outdoor holding and whether you have kennels or not. But roughly, we're at 30 kilos, we're expecting the pig still to be kept at about 24 degrees. At 50 kilos, we're expecting about 21 degrees, and towards 110 kilos, around 18 to 20 degrees. So that's generally their optimal temperature. But like we said, and like I showed you on the other slide, there is a range of temperature at which they're comfortable. We just do not want to exceed the upper critical temperature or go below that lower critical temperature. The presence of straw will make the temperature requirement lower, and the presence of kennels in a shed will make the temperature requirement lower. So we've been talking a little bit about drafts in relation to ventilation and in relation to temperature. So just to clarify, what are drafts? So drafts are essentially a combination of too quick air speed and chilling onto a certain area. So just cold air dropping quite quickly onto pigs. The causes of drafts could be too much ventilation, so either the inlets are too small, causing a higher airspeed, and the wind is picking up, and so there's a higher input into the shed at that time. Wrong air movement, so our inlets, for example, are set at the wrong angle, or in a naturally ventilated shed, the stack effect is not occurring in the way that we would hope. If we have a lower stocking density than we should have for the shed, for example, or if things just aren't, the circulation of air just isn't moving in the way that we assume. Air leaks, so if our, for example, panels between pens have holes in, or particularly any damage to the outer walls, that would result in air leaks and drafts through there. Or under gates in naturally ventilated shed, we often see quite a lot of gaps underneath gates to the outside, and that would create a direct draft underneath those gates into potential lying area of the pigs. And wind influence, again, this is particularly a naturally ventilated shed, either whether it's your prevailing wind, but also the other types of wind which often are chillier. For example, if your westerly wind is your prevailing wind, when the wind does blow from the east, it may well be the colder wind, so it shouldn't be ignored despite it not being the prevailing wind. A maximum airspeed I've put here again is a guideline, but if you're measuring it, should be around 0.15 to 0.2 meters per second. So we wouldn't really want to be going much above that, but there is a large range that you can be in. At that time, I would be saying above that airspeed, we are talking about a draft rather than just natural ventilation. So more housing agenda. So space requirements is really important, regardless of what you're housing. So different weights would have different space requirements, and I've just put up this table for your information. So as the pigs get bigger, the space requirements increase. In straw bedded systems, as I've just put at the bottom there, the area is often 25 to 30% greater than the above. And if you want to be a Freedom Foods, you may need to be slightly higher. And I put the caveat in, as I did for the weaner presentation, that these requirements are unobstructed floor space. So that means that you have to exclude the area that a feeder would take up, or any troughs, water troughs, etc. So that area wouldn't count as lying area or space for the pigs. So that needs to be taken out of the area of the pen. So here we are with the Freedom Food space requirements, which are just slightly different than the previous ones that I showed you, which are not Freedom Foods. So here they have just a slightly higher space requirement, and it depends whether you're mucking out regularly or whether you're deep bedding straw as to your actual space requirement. So if you're deep bedding, you do have a higher space requirement than if you are regularly mucking out your pigs. So lighting, another important factor about housing, which is often overlooked. So just a few facts. Pigs rest more deeply in darkness. So people often tell me when we keep them a little bit darker, we see less vice because they are just more chilled out, which is very true. However, if they're dark for too much time, then the little pigs or the slightly smaller pigs, or even the medium pigs, are less likely to get up and go and eat at the troughs. So you'll have a lower intake, and as a result, you'll probably have a slower growth rate. So if you're it's always wise to have some supplementary lighting over the feeders, or if you want to just make your lights in your shed be so that they are mainly shining over the feeders and spreading out from there. So if your feeders are in the middle of the pen, having your lights in the middle or similar, however your setup is. The legal requirement is that we have 40 lux of light for 8 hours per day. So that's the actual measurements, and it is now a DEFBRA requirement as of the new welfare regulations, which were recently published, that people should be regularly measuring their lights. So we need lux meters to be on farms regularly and actually recording the light that you see in the sheds. And I would recommend, if you're going to start recording or start looking at the amount of lux that your sheds actually have, or the pens actually have, that you go to the darkest, shadiest corner of the pen and check there, as this is often where, if we were being assessed, this is where the assessors would go, or the auditors would go and measure light. So we need to make sure that is a minimum of 40 lux at that point. So obviously it needs to be light enough so that you can easily inspect the pigs as well in the shed day to day, so that if you look over the pen that you can easily see, and this includes within the kennels. And so obviously, as we said, if it's too dark, we have reduced feed intakes, potentially with longer day length or slightly longer amount of light, then you have increased feed intakes. So that brings us nicely on to feed and water, which was next on the agenda. So feed and water are really important things to manage very carefully throughout the grower and finisher period to make sure that we have good, healthy, well-maintained pigs. So what is mostly important about feed and water management? So obviously, as we've previously said in other talks, hygiene is very important, whether it's of the feeders or of the water lines. So regularly disinfecting the water lines if you have nipple drinkers, or cleaning out the river flow troughs if you have river flow troughs is really important. And feeders, we would want the feeders to be regularly cleaned out at the hoppers, making sure that we have no old feed, no mouldy feed within those hoppers or feeders that could actually compromise the health of the pigs. And also make sure that we're not creating a home for any rodents within that trough or feed area. Palatability of feed and of water is very important. Palatability of water is really important so that they keep drinking, and because pigs that do not drink well do not eat well. Palatability of feed is very important because we want them to eat well so that they have good growth rates for us. Ease of access needs to be thought about for both water and feed, regardless of the type of how you're delivering those things. So obviously we don't want the feed and the water to be so far away from the lying area that they do not want to get up and walk there. However, we don't want the feed and water to be anywhere close to the dunging area, really, because or the perceived dunging area, because pigs don't really want to dung where they eat usually. So we want it to be well thought out within the pen as to where your pigs should be lying, should be dunging, and as a result should be eating. Ideally, we should also have the feeders and the drinkers close together, as pigs actually like to go between feeders and drinkers if you watch them very carefully, and that helps to encourage intakes of both. So having them close together helps as well if we can. Our feed particularly needs to be nutritionally correct for the age and the weight of the pig. Generally, pigs have a higher intake as they get bigger, but they have a lower protein requirement, which is a very expensive part of our feed. So we want to be probably reducing our protein levels as we go up in weight. But I would recommend having a good conversation with your nutritionist, if you have someone available to you, to have a good chat about which feeds would be appropriate for which stage of pig. Here's just a table about how much a pig should eat a day. This is similar to the one I put up in the weaner presentation. Again, just covering it so that anyone who didn't listen to that one has it here as well, or again, just some revision for the guys that already have looked at the weaner table. So looking at the grower and finisher, you can see we wanted to feed grower probably 20 kilos plus, and finisher from 40 kilos plus. There may be another two-stage grower that you use depending on nutritional advice again, but this is roughly what we'd expect them and want them to eat of each. Again, this will differ depending on your housing system and different feed specifications, etc. So it's just an example, but just to give you a starting point if you're interested. So again, an example of some growth curves, just to give you a little bit of a benchmarking tool. This is slightly older data, but on one of the farms. So we would have, from a collection of farms, the average daily live weight gain between 28 to 100 kilos is our pink line, and that's come out at 607 grams a day. And then our top third daily live weight gain from weaning to 100 kilos is 670 grams per day. So those are our producers in the top third of this particular collection of data. Top 10% daily live weight gain weaning to 100 kilos is 7 to 12 grams per day. So they really are in the top 10%. And the nucleus herd daily live weight gain. So these are the guys that have a very high health and have very few health issues, have managed in this particular study a period of time 790 grams per day. These figures will vary with the type of genetics that you have and health status. As you can see, the nucleus herd compares differently to the commercial herd. Nutritional quality, housing and system that you're running generally. But again, like I said, I'm putting it up there so that you have a good starting point, potentially if you want to go back to it again at any point. So feed conversion rate. We went through the calculations for this in the weaner presentation. So if you haven't listened to that, I recommend that you just have a look at that if you're wanting to know the actual calculation. But we're just going to go through quickly how it relates to our growers and finishers. So what is a feed conversion? So feed conversion is the efficient conversion of feed into saleable quality meat, ideally lean meat. So it's the amount of feed in kilos required to put on 1 kilo of growth, hopefully of muscle. It generally is expressed as a ratio. And again, a generalization, our younger, lighter pigs have a better FCR, which is actually lower, so an FCR of 1.5 to 1, rather than the older pigs, which have a higher FCR, which is poorer. So the higher the ratio, the higher the number, the 3.2 to 1, for example, is worse than our 1.5 to 1. So as we get older, our FCR generally increases, and therefore we just have a poorer feed conversion. So ideally we want a feed to be converting into lean muscle rather than fat. Lean meat is roughly 75% water, and roughly 1.2 kilos of feed is required to produce 1 kilo of lean meat. Fat, however, is 25% water, and roughly 3.5 kilos of feed is required to produce 1 kilo of fat. So having excess fat on our carcasses, excess fat on our pigs is actually very costly to produce. As the pigs get older, more fat is laid down, and this also varies with the genetics that you have potentially on your farm. So that does definitely also influence the amount of fat there is being laid down. But again, stressing the point, it takes roughly 3 times as much feed to produce 1 kilo of fat than it does to produce 1 kilo of lean meat. So excess fat is definitely costly to produce if we're wanting to head in that direction. And whether you're wanting to lay down fat or very lean muscle will depend on probably on your abattoir contract as well. But just so that you have an idea of what your feed conversion will be based on your requirements. So a couple of factors influencing FCR. Again, not an entirely extensive list, but covering the main points. Genetics will influence FCR, as we've just said. Different genetics put down a different amount of potentially lean meat compared to fat. Age of the pig, again, as we've just said, our younger pigs have a better, lower FCR than our older pigs or heavier pigs generally. Diet density and diet quality may well affect our FCR. Growth rate, so the faster growth pigs generally have a better FCR. Accommodation type and house temperature. So general environment affects our FCR, because if, for example, we're housing our pigs in a naturally ventilated shed, which happens to be very cold, then more energy from the feed that they consume is required to keep the pigs warm, rather than being put down into growth of muscle and or fat. The sex of the pig, so whether it's male or female, has an effect on the FCR. Feed wastage, and that includes how much feed is wasted to vermin, for example, birds and rodents. That negatively affects our FCR. Or feed wastage in slatted accommodation, feed down the slats. That has a negative effect on our FCR as well. And pig health, poorer health negatively affects FCR. So again, another table, not wanting to overwhelm you, but just to show you roughly, basically as we get older, the pigs start to put on more muscle, but they also gradually start to put on more fat. So the older they get, the more muscle they put on, and then the muscle growth slows or plateaus, and that fat growth continues. So the bigger that we're getting our pigs, the more fat we're likely laying down towards the end. So if anyone's interested or hasn't seen it before, or has seen it before from their abattoir feedback, our P2 back fat measurements are taken at the point of P2 on the carcass, which is just depicted at the bottom there, and done like they are on the right there at the abattoir. And this is just a measurement of the amount of fat covering at that point. So just an extra little bit about water, as we talked about basic feed. So the surface of our water, we need to think about how much trough space that we have per pig, or how many nipples that we have, nipple drinkers that we have per pig. We need to make sure that we have enough, ideally extra. The more water generally we provide, the more feed that they start to eat, which is great. We need to make sure that the surface of our water, particularly naturally ventilated sheds, are not ever freezing over, so that we're never having the pigs are always able to access it. In liquid form, we need to make sure it's kept clean during the occupation. That's whether it's nipple drinkers that need to be regularly maintained, or the river flows or water troughs that need to be scraped out and kept clean. Again, proximity and layout, as we discussed before, we need to think about where we're putting our drinkers in relation to the feeders, in relation to the perceived dunging area and perceived lying area of the pigs. We need to check the heights for the nipple drinkers. If you are using nipple drinkers, making sure that they are at the right angle for the pigs, at the right height for the pigs, depending on the size of pigs you're getting in. So for example, if you're getting 40 kilos pigs in, but you're taking them all the way to over 100 kilos live weight, then you need to be thinking about having different heights of nipples in the pens if they're staying in the same pen, so make sure all adjustable nipple heights, so that you can lift them up as they grow. Enough nipple drinkers, as we said, to make sure that we're providing enough water. The flow rate should be checked, and they need to be adequate for the size of the pig that you currently have in that pen. And ideally, we would be cleaning and disinfecting the line between batches if we can. The other thing to think about water is that we potentially have a water system in that can be medicated if needed. If you're having quite a large number of pigs and you ever want to use water medication, having a system that would support a dosatron would be very useful, so that you can dose medication in more easily. So again, like we said, sufficient access to water is a must. So the requirement is, if they are ad lib fed, that there is at least one nipple drinker for 15 pigs. We should be daily checking that all the nipple drinkers are working and not blocked by anything at the filter level. You should be checking the flow to make sure it's adequate, again, for the size of the pig, as we said, and the correct height of the pigs. Just stressing that point, as that is something we regularly have problems with on farm. Access to water is a must. So here, again, another table that just shows you exactly the height of the drinker roughly should be, if it's a nipple drinker, for the different size of pig, and the flow rates. So really above 35 kilos, we want to be 1 to 1.5, and above 60 kilos, we will still want to be 1 to 1.5. So 5 to 6 litres daily for 60 to 100 kilos. They'll just have to drink more. So we want to be nearer to 1.5, getting towards the larger end. So as I said, I'd talk to you a little bit more about health on this time, as we didn't speak about it too much on the weaners. We went only through the basics. So I'm just going to go through a few more diseases. But firstly, how do we identify sick pigs? It's really important that we are visually inspecting our pigs and can see what's wrong with them when they need treatment. So we can roughly identify when something, for example, needs a euthanasia, or needs antibiotics, or needs painkillers, or just needs some TLC and some extra feed and to be separated from the main pen. So what main types of issues do we see in growing and finishing pigs? So I've grouped them into 3 main categories. You can group them into many more, but like I said, we're just going to go through hopefully the basics. So one of the big groups is respiratory disease, so anything to do with the respiratory system. The next group is enteric, so that's our gut diseases, and miscellaneous, which was just a few different extra types that we see quite regularly, including lameness, stiff lameness, some skin rashes, a little bit of meningitis. So I'll go through a couple of those as well, the main ones that we see on farm. So, respiratory disease. There are a few diseases that come to mind when we think about respiratory disease in growers and finishers. One of them, and very traditional one, is enzootic pneumonia, which is on this slide as EP, enzootic pneumonia, caused by a Mycoplasma pneumonia. So it's a bacteria. Generally, this results in a very dry cough quite late towards finishing. So it's often referred to as MHIO for short. Again, we generally don't see a really bad disease with it, but we do see quite a drop in our growth rates and a check in the pigs generally. So it often is vaccinated for at weaning, and some producers now boost that vaccine in the growing stage as well to ensure that we have full cover all the way to 100+ kilos. So that's our first disease, and that is also scored at the abattoir fairly regularly on an AHDB pig health system, which is, if you're a levy payer, is on the pig hub, or potentially by your own private vets as well. They may well do some scoring for you as well. Our second one is APP, which is just stands for Actinobacillus pleuropneumonia. Again, this is regularly checked for at the abattoir and is known as hemorrhagic pleuropneumonia. So this is pleurisy. So when the lungs actually stick to the outer wall of the inner wall of the chest and make it very difficult for the pigs to breathe. You see signs of blowing often in that case. And they actually have a pneumonia large lesion, which is bloody within the lungs themselves. So the lung tissue is also damaged. And as a result, we also hear coughing. This often, if you have not had this before in your unit, this will often result in quite high mortality, so lots of deaths, particularly in older pigs. Again, some people who have a problem with this would vaccinate for this disease, but this tends to be a vaccine at around 8 weeks and boosted at around 11 weeks or 7 and 10 weeks old. So around that time. Those two were bacteria. We're moving on to some viruses. There's PRRS virus, so porcine respiratory and reproductive syndrome virus. This we see quite regularly and used to be called, or is often known as, blue ear. So as you can see in the picture, that's what typically can be seen with PRRS, although that can also be seen with a generalized septicemia within the pig. So just because it has blue ears does not necessarily mean definitely it is as a result of this virus, but that is what it can cause. So as it says on the tin, basically it causes both respiratory problems but also reproductive problems in breeding herds that have it as well. So we often hear more sneezing, you can get coughing and actual lung disease and problems from PRRS itself, but it is also a very immunosuppressive virus, so it dampens the immune system of the pigs and means that you often get more bacterial problems secondary to this virus. The next one I've mentioned here is flu. Hopefully we all know what flu is. It's similar to what we see in humans. So flu virus can affect pigs quite badly. With that, we can see some snotty noses, some sneezing, you can get some coughing, and again, we may well see secondary bacterial disease on top of this flu virus being a problem. There are many different types of strains of flu virus, and some are worse than others. So if you suspect flu, then it might be worth taking some samples and seeing which type of flu you have. Again, for both of these viruses, flu and PRRS, there are vaccines available, but they are not 100% effective against these viruses, as they mutate quite quickly. These vaccines are often given either as a mass vaccination program, depending on veterinary advice, or at weaning or pre-weaning into the piglets, or potentially there's also vaccination within the breeding herd if you're a breeder finisher. Again, chat to your vet if you think those are relevant for you. The next one along is glasses and strep, and I've put that in there. Those are just bacteria that we often see probably in the slightly smaller weaner grower stage and can cause quite high mortality. With glasses and strep, you can see meningitis, so on their sides, paddling with the eye flickering movements. You can see swollen joints, and you can also get coughing, coughing as a result. Often this is diagnosed when a couple of pigs die and we take some samples and we can grow this bacteria, and as a result you can then treat them with some antibiotics. So both glasses and strep are fairly well treated with a penicillin type of antibiotic, depending on which type of glasses or which type of strep that you have grown. So just go to the next slide for me, Sam. Brilliant. So enteric disease. So enteric disease, like I said, is all of our gut problems that we might see in the grower finisher stage, and they can be caused by a whole multitude of things. These are just the main ones that we might see and are quite distinctive. So you might get a salmonella. This is fairly common in pigs and can be intermittently shed. It's obviously a bacteria and is zoonotic, so that means it can be given to pigs by humans, but equally the pigs can give it to humans. So you need to be a little bit careful when we have this diarrhea in pigs. If you suspect salmonella, then just handle them very carefully so that you do not get ill in the process as well. This can cause quite severe problems, can cause quite a reduced growth rate. You may see a mortality as a result of it. There can be it can be quite smelly. There can be small flecks of blood within that diarrhea, and it can be ranging from yellow to, like I said, a little bit bloody, and would require sampling to identify. The next one along is swine dysentery, which is a really important one to bear in mind. So this is a colitis caused by a spirochete, similar to the next one along, and it is particularly detrimental to growth rates and a big economic problem generally in the industry. And cases have spiked fairly recently amongst the industry, so it's a really important one to look out for. This diarrhea tends to be bloody and tends to cause large problems with growth generally. So you might see the pigs starting to waste away quite quickly with it. Sampling again would confirm whether swine dysentery, so Brachyspira, is involved with the problem. And if you believe that you potentially have dysentery, you must ring your vet straight away to try and get some sampling and identify whether this is an issue. And they need treatment pretty promptly. Spirochetal colitis, so this is just a different type of spirochete causing this colitis, a slightly lesser version of dysentery itself, so in the same family of bugs. So again, we might see some growth problems, but not to the same degree as our classic dysentery, which is that bloody diarrhea that we're talking about, so slightly milder version of that. And then ileitis caused by Lawsonia intracellularis, another bacteria which is quite hard to find, so it lives inside the actual cells of the intestine, so it invades the actual intestinal cells, so it can be quite hard to treat with antibiotics. There's only certain types of antibiotics that actually control this, and again this can be differentiated from our other diarrheas via sampling, but overall it tends to be a milder problem. Again, you might see some shaving off in growth, but generally a milder problem. Often people describe it as quite a grey, watery diarrhea, grey-brown diarrhea. It doesn't tend to cause hemorrhage, so tend to cause bloody diarrhea. There's only one type of ileitis which can cause a high mortality, which is porcine hemorrhagic enteritis, and that is when they form a blood clot within their actual gut, and it can cause a high level of death quite close to slaughter. So that's just one type of ileitis that we need to watch out for, but the overall type, the intestinal adenopathy as it's called, is the milder diarrhea and can be identified on sampling. In terms of vaccines for these, so there is a new salmonella vaccine that can be used. Dysentery, there is no vaccine available commercially. An ileitis vaccine is also available. So it's possible, if you believe that you have these things, to control through vaccination, partially at least. So a couple of the miscellaneous that I said that I would just include quickly. So meningitis, like we talked about, maybe a glasses, maybe a strep, can be other causes as well, but that's when we see them on their sides, paddling with those flickering eyes. Generally, this tends to be in the slightly younger pigs, the slightly smaller pigs. Mycoplasma hyosynovii, I've added in there. This is another type of mycoplasma that causes lameness, and generally stiff lameness, in our slightly older growers to finisher pigs, and it's quite common, particularly also in our straw sheds. You may see fractures, again commonly seen in our straw sheds, but also seen on slats where they've been running around and just fractured the legs, but can also come as a result of infection, a swollen joint resulting in a fracture. So those are seen quite commonly, and there is no treatment for that, unfortunately, for the fractures. Middle-ear disease is an example of the picture that we've just shown you on the bottom right there. When they're tilting their head, they just have an infection in that middle ear. So you can see that. Again, that tends to be the slightly smaller end, the slightly younger pigs. Vice is another one I've added in here, which we're going to talk about a bit more later. So that includes our tail biting and our flank biting and ear biting. And I've just also added erysipelas because I think it's important to mention, especially if anyone keeps the pigs on straw or outdoors. This is a very common soil organism and can cause these diamond-like skin rashes, but also can affect the heart and can actually cause lame pigs as well. So that's a really important. This is very penicillin responsive generally, so penicillin jabbing treats it quite well. But if you suspect that you have erysipelas, it needs to be identified and treated very quickly. So it said poor health negatively affects growth rate. Here is an example of the types of effects that different diseases could have on growth rate. So as you can see, our actiniobacillus pleuropneumonia, or APP, can have 25 to 100 grams of growth retardation a day. And increase the FCR 0.1 to 0.3 times. Our dysentery can cause 40 grams, roughly 40 grams of growth retardation a day. It can cause even more potentially, depending on how bad it is. In the pigs, enzootic pneumonia can cause up to 200, so that's our EPR M higher that we talked about right at the beginning, the respiratory disease. Up to 200 grams of growth retardation a day, so can also have a significant effect. So there you are, just a proof that poor health has an effect on growth rate and FCR. So 3 main ways to treat our sick pigs. Our injectable medication, so intramuscular with antibiotics. Or painkillers that way. We could medicate through the water if we have a group problem that you're struggling to control with injectable antibiotics. So if too many are going ill or going lame, then we may consider some water medication. And feed medication if you really are having a large problem and we need to medicate all of them on that particular feed. Euthanasia I put in brackets as well, although it's not a treatment, it may be necessary for maintaining good welfare of the pigs. So if they're too far gone and we're not responding to treatment, euthanasia is essential, really. So just a quick note again then on antibiotic use in pigs. Our industry is generally under pressure to reduce antibiotic use, especially critically important antibiotics. So these are antibiotics which are particularly important for human health. So certain conditions rely on these antibiotics working to resolve, and so they need to be kept for emergency use only, really. Abattoirs are more and more requesting information on antibiotic usage generally, and particularly critically important antibiotic use. So we need to think of ways to reduce these, the use of these. Any CIAs should only be used as a second line, and ideally when you have laboratory evidence saying that they are only that the bug that you've grown is only responsive to critically important antibiotics. So so the other antibiotics which are less important for human health are not working to treat that bug. So to help reduce the use of antibiotics or help reduce the need to medicate our pigs, ideally we should obtain our pigs from as few sources as possible. And run them as much as we can into an all-in, all-out batch system, so we can clean and disinfect really nicely between batches. Ideally, we would know the health status of the source of our pigs, so that we know what we are buying in. And vaccinate as directed by a vet. So vaccinate if we know that we have problems with a certain thing in the source, maybe we need to be vaccinating for that, or if we know that we have certain problems at the weaner or the grower or the finisher period, maybe we think about vaccinating earlier on to protect against that instead of medicating it when the problem's arisen. Deworming the pigs on entry so that they're not challenged in any way. This is particularly for maybe some of the smaller holders or those going outside or those on straw, particularly poor quality straw. Ideally, we would not move older pigs back in with younger pigs. So even if older pigs are running backwards or not growing as well, we don't want to move that pig back in with younger pigs, as the likelihood is there's a reason why they're not growing as well, and particularly a health reason, and we would be transporting that problem from those unhealthy pigs to the healthier younger pigs and potentially causing ourselves some problems there. Thoroughly cleaning and disinfecting each room and allowing time to dry is really important. Having clean, warm, well bedded if you're using straw bedding. Hospital pens, well, hopefully our hospital pens are straw bedded anyway, but make sure that they are well maintained and managed so that your pigs that require some TLC do have that area to recover and are not still in the main pens. Euthanize any chronic poor doers, so those that are not responding to any kind of treatment, that they will be shedding lots of bacteria or viruses depending on what their issue is, but they often shed it and cause problems for all of the other pigs themselves. So those need to be removed from the system if they are not recovering. And equally, we want to remove them and euthanize them humanely for welfare reasons. So we don't want them to suffer unnecessarily. Keep good records and inspect the pigs frequently is obviously very important, making sure that we're going ideally multiple times a day through the pigs and seeing how they're doing. And using health reports on Pig Hub, again from abattoir recordings. So that, as we said, they do some monitoring, although it's currently on pause because we're not allowed into the abattoirs, but the AHDB have some recording going on at the abattoirs generally, which scores the lungs, so gives you some insight into the health status and general health of the units, of your own units. So use that data in conjunction with your vet and try and work on improving your health status, hopefully. Just reiterating the point that proper cleaning and disinfection is key. We need to muck out, removing all straw and feces, remove the feeders if possible and make sure we clean them, soak the building using detergent, pressure wash the building, disinfect with a DEFRA approved disinfectant and allow time to dry. So this is a really important point. It must have time to dry before the next pigs are in, before it's rebedded, if that's what you're doing, and ideally clean and disinfect water lines. And I've just added this table again as an example of bacterial load with different types of cleaning and disinfection routine. And as you can see, hot wash and detergent has significantly decreased the bacterial load already, and then adding a disinfectant to that has decreased the bacterial load even more so. So we can't finish a talk without just touching on vice, as it's a hot topic within the industry generally. So what is vice? Vice is an abnormal behaviour resulting in physical damage caused by either biting, sucking or chewing from one pig to another. It's often described as a welfare issue, but can be an indicator of potential problems in the pig environment or health problems or general pigs under stress. There are quite a lot of different types of vice. Tail biting is generally seen as the most widespread and serious within the industry, but there are different types which we've just listed up there as well. But we are going to talk a little bit more about tail biting specifically. So generally we see tail biting from about 10 weeks of age up to slaughter. If you're going to see it, it tends not to be in slightly smaller pigs, although you can get it on the odd occasion. This is generally the age that we see it at. So the early types of signs of tail biting would be pigs starting to suck on each other's tails, so wet tips of the tails of the pigs, or little pigs just sucking, but no damage yet. Pigs that are holding their tails downwards vertically rather than holding them upwards in a nice position. Red or sore tail tips rather than broken skin, as we said, from that initial sucking from one pig or another. And pigs that are generally restless within their pens, or some aggressive behaviour between pen mates generally, more activity than usual and just not lying as nicely together. Later signs of tail biting, hopefully we've caught some of those early signs and are treating and potentially looking at different problems causing the tail biting and resolving them. But the later signs could include actual blood or scabs on the tails, completely missing tails if they've been bitten badly, and it does happen quite quickly, in some cases overnight. Pigs trying to protect their tails from being bitten, so completely tucked in and against their back ends entirely, or themselves spinning around when you're anywhere near their back end aggressively, so starting increased aggression within the pen. And cannibalism, so once they start chewing, continuing that chewing, lots of bloody snouts, that would start to give an indication that that particular pen or shed is suffering from severe tail biting. Ear and flank biting are also some other common types of vice that you can see, so that when they start to just nibble the tips of the ears or the flanks. These types of vice can also be associated with the environment, particularly ear tipping. I often find that I see it with quite high humidity pens, or those where the air circulation isn't quite as good as we would want to. And flank biting can be associated with stocking at times. They all have very variable factors, but it's worth just looking into, if you're having a lot of them, what the risk factors are for these different types of vice, and trying to resolve them. So overall vice is multifactorial, as I said, but the cause itself generally is a pig stressor, and there are very many different types of pig stressors. Sometimes you can identify an individual or a couple of individual pigs in a pen doing the tail biting, and actually removing those particular pigs from that pen resolves the problem. But other times it's more difficult than that, and you have to look at all of the risk factors to try and resolve the tail biting, or reduce it in the initial instance. So just a couple of examples of the types of problems that could cause an outbreak of vice. In the environment, that could be the ventilation rates of the air speed, again drafts, like we said, build up of noxious gases, so high ammonia levels particularly, but could be other gases as well. High humidity, like we said, that may be seasonal, or maybe just again in conjunction with the ventilation not just working correctly, or the way that we think it is. when it becomes very stuffy, so a very low airspeed. Temperature fluctuations, so when we have really hot days and really cold nights, that can start off a little bit of vice. No bedding or inadequate bedding, if you are bedding with straw, for example. Pen design, so that can actually have an effect on, or impact on the pigs and the stress of the pigs, being long and narrow rather than wide and able to see everything nicely and explore the pen well, or whether it's difficult for the pigs to move or feed or drink when the pens become particularly dirty, potentially as well. Nutrition, small feed particles or very dusty feed or very dusty meal can potentially have a result in formation of gastric ulcers, and that can stress the pigs and cause pain, and therefore can result in some aggression and some vice. Formulation of rations, inclusion of different minerals, salt levels, magnesium levels can have an effect on vice, well, on stress of the pigs and on vice as a result. Feeder positioning and availability of feed. If you have any feed outages, that's a key, often a key time where we see vice. So avoiding any feed outages where possible, or any breakages in the feed lines is key. Water positioning and availability, again, making sure that our water isn't frozen over so that they have water always available, and making sure that we have enough nipples and enough trough space, as we said, and positioned in a way that they are easily accessible. Pigs, we also often say mixed tail lengths has an impact on vice. There's one study that has particularly said that if we dock them to different lengths, that can cause tail biting, or more likely cause tail biting. So having a same length tail within the pen ideally is preferable. Stocking density, so stocking them higher generally is associated with higher levels of vice. Mixing pigs from different pens, or just having slightly more aggressive genotypes can also be associated with outbreaks of vice. Again, there are many other stresses that you probably can think of, but I've just put in the basics. If you can think of more, then add them to the list. So managing vice is really important. It's really important to understand that all people who are managing the pigs are responsible for the welfare of the animals within their care. So any pigs suffering from vice need to be identified very quickly. This means spending time observing the pigs, ideally identifying those pigs doing the biting if you can. If it's gone beyond that, then at least identifying the pigs that require treatment, and removing them and putting them into a hospital pen. We need to keep records of vice if possible, including the incidents and the management interventions, so what you've done to control or help resolve the vice issues, and also that you've gone through the risk factors and identified them within your pen themselves, so providing evidence that you've actually done that and done something to try and resolve the situation. And that also shows us that you're looking for management and solutions in the future. So that's really important. So if it's particularly repeatedly an environmental problem, then we should need to think about what we can do to improve that environment in the future so that we don't have that vice issue. And that's just an example. So the AHDB have created this web hat tool, which I have recommended to quite a lot of my producers to use, because you can type in some of your own information and it then builds you a personalised risk report for vice, particularly for tail biting, and tells you what to look out for. So if you're not sure, or even just have within your documents on farm, just to say it, just as further evidence that you are actually managing or thinking about vice and thinking about solutions to any vice issues that you may have had or may have in the future. So that's really good. And there's also templates on that platform for recording of tail biting for different types of systems. So if you haven't recorded yet, or haven't started recording, or haven't got a template together yet, there's a good template on there which you could download and use on your unit straight away. So next section, which is I think was really important just to include as we're talking about finishes, is preparing for slaughter and selecting pigs for slaughter. So we need to understand what our customer wants first when we're producing pigs. So if we're selling dead weight, you'll have different contracts. So understanding the contract requirements as to what you are actually producing for, including weight and generally depth of back fat. Those are the most common things that the contract specify. So make sure you know your own contracts well and select for those appropriately. If selling to live markets, animals may be purchased on weight, visual appearance, conformation, and just general historical information, previous carcass quality, etc. So the aim is to sell pigs at their optimum weight and optimum probe measurement to optimize or maximize your return. So again, reiterating, you need to understand what your demands of your own contract are here, as there are very many different types of contract. Overall, generally, I'm seeing that the producers that we work with are producing to a heavier live weight, so a heavier dead weight. So that may be the case for you as well, but it depends on your contract. It's really important to try and avoid overweights and underweights, as I'm sure you're all aware, as these give you, well, these are poorly paid for you. Overweights, you put a lot of money in and you get less return from, and underweights generally are not paid as well for you. Want to monitor each slaughter return and respond accordingly. So just manage how you select your pigs based on the feedback that you get from the previous batch. So make sure you keep getting your eye in on selecting for bacon. And ideally, if you want to maximize your return, push to the top end of the contract weight. Consistency is crucial when selecting for bacon. Ideally, when you're selecting and marking up, we want to sell on the same day or very close to that time of selection, because pigs can change quite rapidly towards the end, as I'm sure you all know. Have set parameters that you mark to: weight, number, pig flow, etc. Ideally, if only have one person selecting, then they're going to get a similar weight every time, whereas if you have different people selecting each time, you may get a different output each time. If we weigh the lorries, you get an average live weight on the same day, and probably have a good idea to be able to work out what your rough dead weight is going to be and your killing out percentage. Ideally, you get the slaughter information very quickly and respond to that in the future for future batches very well. And good communication between all staff members involved and the abattoir itself for what you want to do with your next lot. Slat marking, I've included this in here because I've seen this been done not so well at abattoirs, and it's really important for the welfare of pigs that it's done properly. So all pigs that are going to the abattoir must be slat marked with the DEFRA herd mark very clearly. It should be taking place at a suitable stage of production, but must be done before the pigs are loaded for bacon. So not at a weaner stage, but sort of closer to finishing, but must be done before loading. The slat mark must be legible, so that before and after slaughter. So that requires you to maintain your slapper correctly. So the pins must be nice and sharp, not blunt, so you're not having to use excess force, enough ink to cover all of the pins well, and maintained so that it's cleaned regularly and hygienic each time, and not built up crud on it, so that it makes it more difficult to slap and read therefore later on. It is absolutely responsible of the pig keeper to ensure that every pig being dispatched for slaughter has been clearly and correctly marked. It's very important for food traceability ongoing. So just a quick note on moving, handling and loading. This is mostly in this case relating to bacon, but it applies to other ages as well. It's really important that this is done as calmly as possible, and the process is made as easy and stress-free as possible for both the pigs and the stockman. Equipment that probably will be required for this is loading bay, a good and well-maintained race, a gated and secure way. So with the loading bay as well, ideally we'd have a gate between the bay and the lorry, so that we have an area which our wagon drivers or our lorry drivers stand in, so they do not enter the unit and do not break biosecurity, and beyond that gate we do not go onto the lorry to break our biosecurity as well. So a clear demarked line as to where each staff member should be. Moving boards, paddles and rattles can be used, but should be used with care and correctly, with correct training to be done so that the pigs are treated well. This is a really important and hot topic at the moment, and there is more information on moving, handling and loading, with some nice videos to accompany and some more learning materials going on there regularly on the link, as you can see on this slide. So I encourage everyone to have a look, and have anyone who works on your units to have a look and be familiar with these things. So thank you for listening. I know it was a whistle-stop tour today. There's a lot to cover. Any questions?
Fab, thank you very much, Christina. It's Emily. I'm just going to do the questions. So we've had a couple come in.
Yeah.
We've only got time for a couple actually, but so we've got, how high does ammonia levels need to be in the shed before it will start affecting the pigs?
So there are really good tables, to be fair, on the DEFRA. There's DEFRA websites, but there is discussion about this. So there are some levels that have been mentioned in the codes that we should be working to, which we can probably, Emily, we can probably send them out, can't we, when we answer any other questions potentially, if we need to, some tables. Yep. But actually accurate measuring of ammonia is we've found to be quite difficult and varies with devices. So as a really, and this is a very crude measurement, I would say if it's affecting you, if you're going in and you're noticing the ammonia, we're probably past the point of it starting to affect the pigs. So we want to be doing something very quickly at that point. So if either your eyes are stinging or you're finding the air is very tight and stuffy, then we need to be doing something quite quickly on terms of ventilation, etc.
Fab, thank you. And
I
then
think that answers that.
Yes, yeah, and it's a good point. We'll pop it on the document as well at the end for people. And then another one that I've got here is, if we're going back to the light and measuring it, and that it's a new sort of requirement.
Yeah.
So it's 40 lux for 8 hours a day, but are there any regulations around the colour of that lighting?
So it needs to be bright. It needs to be well, it needs to be white light, really. Not pure UV, but it needs to be, as far as I'm aware, it needs to be just a general white light. I'm not sure we would get away with red or blue, but I can look into it further in terms of exactly what colour. But generally, we'd be looking at LED strip lights or strip light kind of colour.
Lovely. We've got a couple more, but we'll get back to those and answer them at the afterwards, I think, because we haven't got very much time left. So thank you ever so much again. And we've had some compliments as well, Christina. So
oh, good, that's nice to hear. I hope it's been interesting for everyone. Like I said and repeatedly said, it's a very broad topic, so I am only skimming the surface. I do realise that, and there's much more that you could say about each individual section. You could do a whole hour on. So I've tried to incorporate as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks both of you for running those questions. We've just got a couple of bits of information sort of on next steps, just to make you aware. As Christina just said, this is quite a big topic, and same with the other webinars that we've run, to run in a sort of hour and 15 minute setting via a webinar. So we are planning at the moment for 2021, COVID willing, to run some training, but in the first instance we're sort of looking into and planning taking our face-to-face training sessions, the Stockman development programs that we usually run, onto an interactive online format. So as I said right at the beginning of planning those, but if you are interested, or if you would like to sort of express some interest, so we can let you know when that's finalised and when that will be happening, if you can just send your information to Emily Boyce. Her email and her phone number is up on the screen at the moment. That would be great, and we can get you that information for 2021. We also would like to know, like to have your feedback, and let us know how your experience with the webinar was. It's really helpful to us. Any compliments or anything to Christina, I'm sure, is equally as helpful. In the next 24 to 48 hours, you'll receive an email with a link to the webinar recording, and there's also an opportunity for further questions there. And as Emily said, she's going to be collating some of the questions that we haven't been able to answer today due to time, and she'll be sending those round. So this will be online. It will be within the events page on our website in the archive, and it'll be on the BPA website, and it will be on our YouTube channel. So if you want to see what other events we've got coming up, if you just check the events part of our website, there's a webinar coming up at the beginning of December looking at pigs in the arable rotation, and a few other good topics. So thank you to Christina for delivering tonight's session. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for joining and listening. I'm going to end the webinar now. It was very nice to see you all here, or have you all here tonight. Thanks.